Hello, everybody. What's going on? My name is Joseph. I'm going to be your low budget host of the day. And today I've got a very interesting video. I'm going to be continuing my 1936 election series. And today I'm going to be doing the last candidate that I want to cover, which is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the, at that time, President of the United States. So please remember to like, share, subscribe to this channel. Let's just get straight into the video. So for the uninitiated, Franklin D. Roosevelt was the longest running president the United States had seen. He served three full terms and one partial fourth term. He died 11 months into his fourth term. But he was very popular. That's an understatement, but he was extremely popular with a certain group of people and enough of the American populace that he was able to get reelected multiple times. He's actually the reason why presidents have term limits. Term limits did not exist before Franklin Roosevelt. They were kind of assumed, really. But with Franklin Roosevelt, he did push the limit on how many times a president can run. And he's also, in my personal opinion, he's also one of the closest things our government had ever seen to a tyrant. But that's my opinion. It's not the opinion of everybody, obviously. But what I want to kind of highlight in this video is a lot of his policies, or at least some of his philosophical ideas, some of his political ideas, before I get into the nitty-gritty of what he was like when he was running for his second term, which was what he would have been running for in 1936. So, give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about. I'm gonna go through his acceptance speech in 1936 and kind of compare it a little bit to his acceptance speech in 1932. Here's how it starts. Freedom in itself and of necessity suggests freedom from some restraining power. In 1776, we sought freedom from the tyranny of a political autocracy from the 18th century royalists who held special privileges from the crown. It was to perpetuate their privilege that they governed without the consent of the governed, that they denied the right of free assembly and free speech, and they restricted the worship of God, that they put the average man's property and the average man's life up in pawn to the mercenaries of dynastic power, and they regimented the people. Okay, that long paragraph to summarize is elites rule. We rebelled from elites in Britain. That's essentially what FDR is talking about. What I find kind of weird about what he says there is that last line where he says the average man's life in pawn to the mercenaries of dynastic power. That is interesting to me given the fact that his family, the family he was descended from, was one of these elites in a weird way. Now, they weren't hugely elite prior to his second cousin Theodore Roosevelt becoming president, but they were rich, very rich. And Franklin's line was one of the richer halves of the Roosevelt family from what I remember researching. But it is interesting he mentions that, and I also think it's kind of funny because, well, it's pretty typical of Democrats to claim they're not elites when they really are, and this is a great example of that. Next, of course, you have other lines that kind of match this theme. His 1936 acceptance speech goes through the theme of we must break away from the royalists. We must ensure that they cannot ruin the economy again. Because what he was running on, of course, was the successes, what he viewed as the successes of the New Deal, something he had concocted in 1933 after becoming president. Something that he was actually inspired by Woodrow Wilson to do. So, and I'll get into the influences in just a second, but first, I bolded a line here that I thought was kind of interesting. Even honest and progressive-minded men of wealth, aware of their obligation to their generation, could never know just where they fitted into this dynastic scheme of things. Again, he is essentially saying that dynasties and rich elites were ruling the country and driving the economy into the ground while making out like bandits. Again, I find it odd that a Roosevelt, a very rich family head at that point was complaining about this. But then again, it's not that surprising given how politicians tend to operate, so I'm not that surprised. But if we go back to his acceptance speech in 1932, we get some more ideas of who influenced him specifically. So here's a line from that particular speech. Let us now and here highly resolved to resume the country's interrupted march along the path of real progress, of real justice, of real equality for all of our citizens, great and small. Our indomitable leader in that interpreted march is no longer with us, but there still strives today his spirit. This leader he's referring to is Woodrow Wilson, who he called the great, indomitable, unquenchable, progressive soul of our Commander-in-Chief, Woodrow Wilson. So he viewed Woodrow Wilson in a very positive light, and that is not entirely surprising, and it also backs up what I had said several videos ago. At least I think I said it. I don't know if I did or not. Where I view the New Deal as the ultimate compilation of everything the progressive era stood for. It is the government coming in to fix the ills of society. That is what the New Deal was supposed to do. And Woodrow Wilson, fun fact, also believed in a lot of the same things that FDR believed in. However, FDR took Woodrow Wilson's concept to its absolute extreme, so here's some of it. Here's another line from the 1936, so going back to 1936 to that acceptance speech from FDR. Governments can err, presidents do make mistakes, but the immortal Dante tells us that divine justice weighs the sins of the cold-blooded and the sins of the warm-hearted in different scales. So basically the government has a duty to help you out and right the ills of society. That is what the government does. That is what FDR believed in, was that the power of the government was far greater than that of the corporation or the citizen, or in his case, the elites. And one of the other things I wanted to point out was how popular he was before 1936. And it's kind of a surprise he did so well, given the amount of criticism he actually received during the middle of the 30s. But at the same time, it's also not surprising, given that a good portion of the country, no matter where you were at, did favor him. I mean, as I mentioned in my Landon video, Alfred Landon didn't perform very well, despite having a very, very good message that also addressed a lot of the issues that came about under Hoover as well. But unfortunately, Landon lost. But what I find mysterious is that there were a lot of high-profile people who were very critical of FDR. For example, this lady isn't exactly high-profile, but she's high-profile enough. A lady by the name of Caroline Henderson was wrote constant letters to the government. Caroline Henderson, for those who don't know, was a lady who lived in No Man's Land. So No Man's Land is this little strip that's there's the state of Oklahoma. It looks like a pan. It's the handle part of the pan. That's the best way to describe it. The reason why they call it No Man's Land is because it is so dry and the ground is so hard. There's no way people could have survived there without trying to drill for water. Well, once they figured out how to do so with windmills, a lot of people started farming in that area. That was also the hardest hit area of the Dust Bowl, naturally. So there's that. But Henderson was, of course, a prolific writer who constantly wrote to various journals, various government agencies. And in 1932, she actually defended Hoover, weirdly enough. Here's what she had to say. I never questioned Hoover's personal integrity or idealism, but I felt, as I imagine you did, that he was tied with a bad bunch. So she basically is saying that Hoover wasn't really that bad. He just had a really bad crowd. Kind of sounds familiar. Sounds a bit more like what went on with Trump as well. Trump wasn't really that bad for president. What really happened with him was he did a terrible job hiring people to go around him. That was where he went wrong. I'm pretty sure even he, as big-headed as he is, would probably admit that now. Probably. But what she said about Roosevelt's also interesting, too. Roosevelt, who seems to me quite inadequate for this position. So she didn't really believe that Roosevelt was a great president, and this would make a great president, and this was, of course, in 1932. Fast forward to 1934, she wrote a letter called Dust to Eat. This was a letter where she complained about the fact that there was dust to eat. There was no way to farm. There was no way to get food. All she could do was futilely attempt to seal up windows as fine dust was pouring into her home. But during this particular letter, she actually, in the beginning, complains a lot about this issue, about this issue of wasteful government. On this, she writes, one of these criticisms relates to the alleged wastefulness of relief administration and the useless or damaging work projects attempt in our county with a population of 14,000 between November 15th, 1933 and December 27th, 1934. The public work payrolls under the CWA and FARA are reported as totaling $331,769. Don't know what that is in our money, but I imagine it's a lot. The sum expended seems to us truly enormous, and the extent of aid required is most unusual in a section where pioneer traditions of self-help and neighborly assistance are still strong. Yet certain facts should be considered. In the late summer of 1934, the County Relief Administration reported that they had been operating on about a 3% margin. So essentially, her biggest criticism was a lot of these agencies created under the New Deal were wasteful. And she wasn't the only one who complained about this. There's an individual by the name of Thomas Maynard Keynes. Thomas Maynard Keynes, there we go, states that, quote, that is my first reflection, that the NIRA, or the National Industrial Recovery Act, for short, which is essentially reformed and probably impedes recovery, has been put across too hastily in the false guise of being part of the technique of recovery. So the NIRA was basically the main body of the New Deal. It was the organization that governed how the New Deal was supposed to operate. Later, he actually wrote, Keynes wrote that, quote, I do not mean to impugn the social justice and social expediency of redistribution of income aimed at by the NIRA and by the various schemes for agricultural restriction. The latter, in particular, I should strongly support in principle, but too much emphasis on the remedial value of higher price level as an object in itself may lead to serious misapprehension as to the part which prices can play in the techniques of recovery. In other words, FDR did have his critics. I mean, he wasn't all overly popular. However, there was not enough of them to fight back against. There was not enough of them to make enough of a stink that people wouldn't vote for him in droves, which is exactly what happened in 1936. In 1936, FDR won by a landslide, all because he had done well enough, or at least had enough good PR with the vast majority of Americans, that he was able to win by a landslide. That is essentially what happened. I just find it kind of interesting. I really like a lot of the criticisms that these people have, and it gives you kind of an idea of why I'm not a huge fan of FDR. Because despite all the praise that he does get, he did grow the government. He grew the government to such a degree that we are dealing with the direct effects of it, because nobody bothered to get rid of a lot of his programs. Some people continued them, such as Truman. He continued a lot of his programs. And Johnson. And Lyndon Johnson really continued a lot of FDR's programs and took a lot of them and essentially made them permanent. So that gives you guys an idea of what I think about FDR. Now, I'm going to end this series here. I do enjoy you guys watching this. I hope this was decently educational. And I know this video was a little long, but it's kind of hard not to talk about FDR in detail. He's a very fascinating politician. In the future, I will be doing more videos on the Dust Bowl and on the Great Depression, because I've always found it to be kind of an interesting time period. It's a little after when I usually stop with my historical studies, but I do want to do some more videos on this. So thank you for all the support. Um, Thank you for all the feedback too. I definitely need it, and please forgive me for the non-smoothness of a lot of these videos. I'm still practicing, but thank you everybody. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and also have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye.